My name's Joe Woodham. Welcome to All Things Design, the podcast that unpacks how design drives digital transformation. Today, we're speaking with Bronwen Rees, product design lead at Xero. Bronwen, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, pleasure. Looking forward to our conversation.
Let's just jump straight into it. How did you become a designer?
I go all the way back to school where I was studying art, and I'm in the school at like 16 doing my GCSEs. I was studying art, and basically I had a supply teacher that came in and looked at my art book and said, "You kind of suck at art. But if you look at your book, you're actually really good at design, and you should go and have a look at studying design at college and uni." And I hadn't really heard of design much. We'd done some sort of graphic design at school, but it was all the classic, like, just what does a CD cover look like? And that was it. I did go on to go to college, and I looked at kind of what actual design courses look like. And I was like, yeah, this looks like my art book. And then from there, I designed at college. I went to uni and did design, and then took a very traditional path of stepping into kind of brand design as an intern, and have progressed through the ranks ever since.
Did she shatter your dreams when she told you you were never going to be an artist? Is that what the plan was until that moment?
No, I was well aware I was not an artist. Until that point, I thought maybe sport. I was a very sporty character, and yeah, I thought maybe that might be my calling. But actually, she made my dreams in teaching me about design, so it was great.
Yeah, right. You could have gone two ways there, and you stuck a stick in the sand and it's like, oh, well, design's the thing. And
It's been great.
so now you're at Xero at the moment. Tell me a bit about what's happening at Xero. Like, it's a very well-known company in Australia. They've done very well over the last few years, and they're expanding a lot internationally and globally. So keen to find out a bit more about your journey there.
Yeah, so I joined Xero about 4 years ago. I initially came into the Xero team to work with their design systems team on the website. I did that for a year, enjoyed it, but missed product. I did enjoy solving customer problems and being really close to the customer problem. And up until that point, I hadn't really exercised native app experience. I'd always done responsive web versus that actual true blood mobile experience. A year in, I actually got the opportunity to apply and move into the lead role for the mobile design team. So that's what I did. So I focused then on I now focus predominantly on what we call the Xero accounting app. And I kind of look after all the, alongside my director, look after all the core experiences that are delivered in the Xero accounting app. But to your kind of earlier question, it's a very different place to where I started 4 years ago.
In terms of the Xero mobile app in comparison to the desktop, like what's the user percentage? Because I'd imagine a lot of people spend time on the desktop app just reconciling and doing everything they need to do. Like, how do you approach the mobile app? What's the usage there?
Yeah, so technically I think we have a kind of a 1 in 3 to a 1 in 4, which isn't surprising. So the mobile app predominantly focus on small business owners. It's actually focused on the owner side, whereas the web experience is focused on anything from accounting and bookkeepers, partners, all the way through to small businesses running and maintaining their own businesses on the website. So we do kind of 1 in 3, 1 in 4. We're actually outgrowing the web at the moment, which is really exciting. Year on year, we're actually performing better and increasing our usage. But what we're described as currently is a companion app. So we don't house all the features that the web do. We just take a small subset that makes sense for the mobile device and kind of roll it out on mobile. Whether that stays true, there's a whole lot of questions and a whole lot of opportunities for us to kind of chase in the next coming years around what shape the mobile app will take.
Interesting. Well, if you're outgrowing the web app, what might that mean? Like, is that a lot more growth from usability on the mobile app, or just more features? Or
at the moment, usability, I think something Xero hasn't been very good at in the past is being mobile centric. It was known and understood that, Xero is, or accounting is, I shouldn't say Xero is, accounting is a complex thing you have to do. You use tables and spreadsheets and all kinds of things. And so people don't want to do it on the mobile. But I think we've started to see that sort of thought being disproved with other complex kind of tools being done on mobile and being done really well. I think about way back of like, I never wanted to do my banking on the app on my mobile because it was so hard and there's so many things I'd have to do. Now I only do it on my app and I don't ever go to the web experience. I think there's a lot of opportunity. Not all of the features make sense for this, but there's a lot of opportunity for some of these features to become mobile predominant.
That's a good point. Maybe it's just a mindset shift, because I was thinking like 10 years ago, what accountant do you think would be looking at, wow, digital, like you'd use Excel spreadsheet. Now you use the mobile for it. So same with, I use mobile app for everything. And if I have to log on to my net bank on my computer, it's a pain, the mindset shift. But let's go back to like efficiencies. You've obviously been with Xero for 4 years. It's grown a lot over that time. Talk me through, I guess, some of the changes and maybe some of the inefficiencies that you've noticed as you've gone through that growth journey, and then maybe some of the changes that you've been able to implement to resolve it.
Yeah, I think COVID was an interesting time for us. So with Xero, like most businesses, I got hired during COVID time. They grew fast and probably grew faster than they needed to. And so one of the kind of the first inefficiencies we saw probably was just the number of people involved in many processes or involved in, or the layers is probably the better way of thinking about it. There's a number of people, there was multiple layers. You get anything done or approved or signed off, it was pretty because there was so many layers to go through. And so like many other tech companies post-COVID and post us being kind of taken over by a few kind of people who came in from the US into our C-suite, we actually took a restructure. And in the restructure, we did lose, I think it was almost close to 1,500 people, which is at the time an awful, awful thing to go through for anyone. And the aftermath was incredibly difficult. But the outcome of that has meant that we've been able to cut out a couple of layers, which means that we've finally been able to move through to delivery way faster than we've before. Sometimes maybe too fast, but it's definitely flipped us on its head where we were kind of maybe taking 18 months to deliver something to delivering it in 3 months. It's been wild.
And would you say that that's just removing some of those layers in the communication piece that helped streamline a process from 18 months to 3 months? Because that,
I think it's one of the pieces. Yeah. I think that alone did it. I'm probably setting us up for failure because they're going to start no, I think it's one of the pieces. There's lots of other things that have occurred, definitely. One of the other ones that there's been a big shift for us. And I don't know if I love it. I'm not going to lie. At the moment, it's one that I'm sort of battling with internally, is we've gone from a bottom-up kind of autonomous sort of feature improvement driven culture where, we go out to customers and we find out what they want and what sort of improvements they want. And we validate them and test them to finally going into delivery, where we've now top down with our initiatives. We've got big bets that are being led by our stakeholders, and those big bets form into what we call key initiatives or, OKRs as well, which then obviously feed down to the relevant teams, which you kind of sign up to. And so you're now being kind of told what you're working on versus working out what to work on. So that's another one for us, which is that sort of we're cutting out that whole early discovery piece around what should we be working on and probably hedging our bets on everything rather than kind of a few things versus now that kind of top-down approach. Yeah.
I'm just going to rephrase that so I make sure I understand. So data insights and that feeding the strategy and vision for what you work on. And now it's more around strategy and vision to production.
Yes. Perfect way of summarizing that. Yeah, Joe. Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Is that a US-led change, or is that just an organizational change because of the size of Xero now?
It's hard to say. I think it is a US-led change, which is the US-led change is speed to delivery. I suppose more, I don't want to use the word authoritarian, but less autonomy for us as designers or as pods determining what we want to do. I'm trying to think of a better way of putting that. Yeah, I don't want to dig myself into
We'll stop it there before you. Let's go back to, I guess, the structure that you have previously been using, where it's insights driven, and you're dealing with the users to understand that. You did mention that sometimes the discovery phase was pretty lengthy. Were you able to create efficiencies in that? If you could identify that there was inefficiencies and things were taking too long to get to maybe implementation phase or through that strategy and vision, how did you improve some of the efficiencies as a design team?
Yeah, so we go a bit more granular here. We kind of come out of the top level, I suppose, it led initiatives. And this is actually much more of a kind of mobile led initiative in the design team, specifically in the mobile space. So it's very much an area that I can control. And I've been able to work, like I said, with my director on it, which is we noticed before, like I say, the restructure and things like that, that we were what we would call, obviously, pod embedded designers into pods, or we embedded our designers into key pods. The pod designer worked independently, really, with their pod, and their design discovery phases were taking an incredibly long time. An example of that was sort of 14 to 16 weeks of discovery time. Now, that's huge, especially when you think about the fact is that there's engineers potentially waiting for work, and they may be sitting there twiddling their fingers and just waiting, or they might be working on other things, right? But that's a huge amount of time. And so we went back to the drawing board and thought, like, what can we do to make sure that designers are accountable for delivering their discovery work, but in a short space of time, and back up into design. That I need to know as a lead, you are going to say what you're going to deliver on. And so to do that, we basically decided to use a pooling model, or some may know it as an agency model, where we brought all the designers out of the pods and they started to work where we assign them to a project by project basis, and they got the project scoped and allocated. And then they went back into the pod to work on that. At that point, they became accountable to both their pod and the design team, where they didn't before with the design team. And they would have to deliver discovery in in a reduced amount of time. And we did manage to move the discovery time down from 14 weeks to 3.5 or 3, which was about a 70% reduction.
That's huge.
And it's simply by moving them from being kind of individual designers accountable to their pods to actually designers, part of a design team, accountable back to the design team itself.
Can you explain that in maybe a bit more depth so people could understand exactly how that model works? Because like reducing that by 70% is a huge time saving, but return on investment, right? Like you're cutting down the cost for any new feature. So can you unpack that so people could understand how that might look from maybe even a smaller business perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So when the designer was embedded, they were accountable for everything that they did, which meant and included scoping of the work. Now, what actually that often meant was that they didn't scope work. They would just kind of know that they're supposed to do something in what, if you're thinking about the double diamond, in that kind of understand phase and a couple of activities in there. And, okay, well, that kind of worked and that didn't work. And so they then try some other stuff till finally we got somewhere where we're like, cool, that looks about right and sort of answers these requirements. Great. Whereas actually where we started to move it, or we've moved it to with regards to kind of this pooled or agency model, what it means is that the product manager has to submit a ticket into the backlog of the design sort of board or Xero as such. We use Asana, and they say, I've got this project, I need a designer. I then go and chat with the project manager to understand what the problem is. And then I scope that ticket and then hand that ticket to a designer and say, here is your ticket and here is the problem. Go and work in that pod. They go and do that. They may scope it themselves with regards to the activities that they need to carry out, or it may be me, depending on the level of the designer. And those tasks or those subtasks all are timed. They have time-blocked activities that they need to deliver on. And then when they complete that, it kind of goes into the next phase, and they may continue working with the pod, they may not. They may come out and be assigned to another project. They may stay in and see off the project, and then they finish that and come back to us. And we will repeat that process over and over and over again.
Was there any challenges, I guess, because I imagine if I'm a designer and I've got 12 or 14 weeks to produce something and now it's reduced to 3.5 weeks, there might be some pushbacks, or like maybe me feeling like I'm being told to work harder with a shorter time. Well, like, was there any challenges there to overcome that with the design team?
I think initially the design team were adverse because they were used to being embedded, and that was actually more of the problem rather than actually working harder per se. They were used to being like, if you were part of the reconciliation team, they were used to being the pro designer in the reconciliation space. Now, what we were having to teach them is actually, no, in mobile, we cannot be the SMEs on reconciliation or on invoicing. Our job is to be the SMEs on mobile and to work with our counterparts in the web space who have this one focus of this one job, and to work with them directly in order to learn from them with regards to the SME. So that was probably the hardest thing, which is them transitioning from being like an expert in invoicing to an expert in mobile. And I think that kind of took a little while for them to shift that mindset. Yeah, that was probably one of the hardest challenges.
You could look at that in two ways. I think being able to expand your skill set or understanding of more of the business adds more value back to the business, because you're going to
100%
area works.
Yeah. And that's the joy of this model, right? Which is that now we have a number of designers who are knowledgeable enough on all of the areas of the business, all of the areas on mobile. And so slowly our knowledge is growing as a team. It's not that one person is becoming an expert and then a new person comes in and like it's sort of like we all go up. One person comes in and they're learning, all right, we'll dip a little bit. It's not a big deal because we all have that knowledge now. Let's all grow again together. So yeah, I think actually it has a lot of benefits, this model.
Yeah, sounds like it. It kind of makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Moving beyond this, like you've obviously, that was the model that you're working with, but change of C-level staff and I guess where the company's operating to a degree, it sounds like the US is going to take like obviously the US market is huge in comparison to Australia and New Zealand, it dwarfs it. So I can understand why the focus is there. How is the operational model changing to suit that market? So it's a bit of an evolution of a company and a product.
Yeah, I haven't yet seen it roll into mobile. It's starting to happen across other spaces in web, which is, predominantly US focused projects. I mean, we have something quite similar happening in mobile, but our usage at the moment isn't high enough to kind of justify that. I don't know if the operational model, because this is mobile specific, that model, it hasn't been rolled out to the rest of the design squad or the design team at the moment. Yeah. But I think there's this view of like, hey, maybe this is actually the direction we go, which is actually design. I think the term has become more fungible. But I think it's kind of like this idea that you are pulled and then you go away and then you're pulled and then you're going to go away again. So it's kind of that flexible model. I think there's a kind of beginning to have conversations around like, does the whole design team become kind of this fungible model?
And how does the design team work currently? You mentioned that mobile is very separate to the other team. Like, so they're not using the same structure or same model that you are. How are they?
No. And this is actually, to be honest, this goes back to maybe what you were saying, some of the things that will change, which is design teams used to be kind of broken into different areas or different portfolios. Mobile happened to just be classed as a portfolio, despite us having to be spread across the entire kind of product.
Yeah.
We were deemed kind of a portfolio. All the design portfolios and teams had all of their own ways of doing things, which meant obviously some were really great and strong where others maybe not so much so, and they had some quality issues or, their crits weren't very good or something. What we're all looking at now is how do we elevate our quality and standardize our processes, approaches, just across the board. And that includes obviously design at that point. So we're going through that process now. And I think to the point of efficiency, that will boost efficiency because those processes will be finally standardized. It doesn't matter what team you're in, it's all working the same way.
So I want to talk, like maybe jump back a bit. You said that you started in the design systems team. Was that standardizing the design system across all products or just mobile? Like
just web at the time. So the design system, Xero, that it was called, focused on predominantly the web products. Mobile Xero wasn't part of, and it still isn't. And this is where I'm saying we're shifting towards this mobile mindset.
Yep.
We don't have a team fully supporting a mobile design system at the moment.
Okay. Is that on the roadmap of things that need to happen?
I really bloody hope.
So you mentioned that there's like moving to a more of like a process or structured approach. Like where are you in that journey, and talk through some of the efficiencies that have already started to sort of come to fruition off the back of that?
Yeah, I would say we're pretty early on. We got a new EDM of design about a year ago. And so he initially took on the lay of the land. What's going on? Where are the issues? And now he's identified a number of key areas. So for us, it's planning and scoping is a big one. This is across the board, obviously. Crits and reviews. And there is one more. Oh, design language. And so we're now looking at all three of those. We're at that stage where we've done the assessment. We've looked at where we're at with regards to maturity on each of those. And then we're starting to ideate on how can we begin to uplift them. I was literally in a workshop this morning. How can we standardize crits and reviews and make sure that the kind of feedback is being given is safe? How is it that feedback is constructive? When do we do it early and also, and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, we're at different layers, but we're kind of lifting those three areas together.
Is that a fun process to get involved in? Because I guess going through that employee journey with a company that's growing and expanding and everything is probably changing pretty quickly. Like if you're embedded in a large corporate, things move a lot slower. Whereas a company like Xero evolving so quickly, like I imagine you're figuring out a lot of this as you go, or being a part of it as it evolves. How are you enjoying the process of building a process?
I really enjoy the design ops side of things. So there is an element of the ones, I think for me, like planning and scoping and seeing that success of like what that can do. I mean, a perfect example is like what happened in mobile, right? Is that was us going away, looking at our operational costs and just generally like how does design ops work? How can we uplift that? So the fact that we could potentially utilize some of our learnings and provide it to the rest of the design team is really great. Same with crits and reviews. I think anything that helps ensure the quality and the designers coming through, because we also, we're all accountable to making sure that if you bring a designer on, you're going to grow where you are. Like I want someone to come to Xero and feel like, hey, I've been surrounded by some amazing designers and they taught me a lot. And so for me, like crits and reviews is a perfect place of actually lots of exposure to loads of different people, so that one I really enjoy. Design language, it's way too opinionated. I'm staying out of that one. I'm letting someone else do that one. Designers love opinions on design. So yeah, I can't wait to see the outcome of it because it will bring, cohesion to the whole of the experience and for our customers. But yeah, not interested in defining that one right now.
Yeah, that sounds like a challenge you want to jump in. Do you understand what they're trying to achieve there? Is it just how you communicate, like the words and terminology?
Yeah, it is. In a nutshell, it's cohesion across the product. Something that we've struggled with working in portfolios and silos and being so grand and having lots of different sign-off points has meant that there's never been anyone really looking at the experience at that full whole level. And so we did the classic of putting an audit together, realizing, oh my God, this is a bit of a mess, really. People are jumping from what we've got as our partner website or partner product into Xero Blue, which is kind of the main Xero product. And then they might be jumping somewhere else and they're getting very different experiences. And yes, technically they've all used the design system, but it still looks very different. So that's what they're looking at, is like, how do we bring cohesion and utilize UI patterns to make sure the experience is a solid, holistic one?
I think every conversation I have, everyone's got the same challenges there. Is it easier for a company like Xero, who aren't as old as like an enterprise that have been around for 100 years, to make those changes and get that cohesion across?
I don't think so. No, because we're still working off a monolith, right? We're still working off old technology, and technology moves so fast. So I think it's been hard to go. I know specifically for me in design, there's been often so many conversations where I'm like, can we do this? And they're like, nah. So you go, okay, well, what if I tweak it a bit here and tweak it a bit here? And they're like, yeah, okay, cool. And then suddenly you've ended up creating this slightly different experience. And if every designer is doing that, you end up in this place where you just end up with a mess, right? And I think 10 years old, 100 years old, technology moves so fast, it changes so quickly. It's still not easy.
But how do you resolve that, right? Because every designer is going to have a different approach to resolving. Like when a developer comes back and says, I can't do that. The designer is going to think, it's like, how do I resolve this? And they're going to try and find the answer. How do you standardize that? How do you go, all right, a developer can't do this, so we've got to follow these next steps to ensure that whatever the next outcome is, it's going to be the same as the outcome that we've got over here.
Yeah. I think it has to be twofold, right? Which is, it's no longer just a designer's decision. The designer needs to go back and share with their product, with their engineering counterparts. The decision needs to be taken, maybe escalated further. First of all, it shouldn't I think it has been just put on the designer, and the designer had the autonomy before to just do that. That's not, we're trying to change that, which is like, no, you're actually accountable to upholding and enforcing a holistic language. If that doesn't happen, you need to let people know. And that, we've got review processes to kind of stop that happening, or you might decide to set up a feedback session. I think the other is just education for the designer. I think the designer must feel empowered and knowledgeable of those other spaces. And I think that's something that we haven't also been good at, that we're trying to pivot to, which is breaking down silos, which is like, if I know that I'm working on something that is similar or identical to an experience over there or an experience over there, if I make that change, it is my job as a designer to go and speak to those people, and together we can work out what we should do going forward.
It's easier said than done, right? How do you know what stage they're at? Like, there's so many unanswered questions. Like, it would solve the problem, but in a company that's evolving so quickly, how do you know who's at that right stage, who's got a similar idea? Or, yeah, it's a tricky one.
It is tricky. I mean, something that we've just done in mobile that I think is happening across the whole of web is we've just mapped all our journeys, every single journey in the mobile experience. And so if I'm looking at modernizing a screen, it is my responsibility to go and find that screen elsewhere in mobile to know how I'm going to impact it. And I think, yes, Xero and web is a huge product, but there should be a similar exercise in, where does your flow sit? What are the other similar flows, or where does that journey sit? And then you can start kind of mapping back to those experiences. So you should be able to source exactly who you need to contact.
It does sound like that mobile does have it a little bit worked out. If everyone's working across every area rather than being just the knowledge person on one specific thing, they would know where to look or who to speak to or what's happening. So I guess that might happen.
I mean, it's much harder in web, right? Web is way bigger. Yeah. That's the other thing, right? Which is much deeper. When we mapped our journeys and our flows, we had the largest number of journeys compared to any other domain, but our flows were very shallow. So we're broad but shallow, whereas actually if you looked at the website, their flows were very deep, but they may only be looking after 2 or 3 journeys.
Yeah, I can imagine. Still stuck on something you said earlier. Like, if we go back, like if I in 2 years' time start reading my P&L on my phone, I was like, what does that experience look like? Because there's a lot of things to look at when you're reading a P&L. So you've got your work cut out for you.
We actually do have P&L on our app, so you should go and look and see what you think.
To be honest, Like, yeah, my finance director reports back to me with my P&L, so it's not really to look at unless you see.
No, that's that we do have it. Yeah, and it could be improved. Don't get me wrong, it could be improved. But yeah, it was one of the top requested features was to have P&L on the app.
Really? All right, I'll check it out after this. I guess a lot's happened in your journey in Xero. Is there anything else that kind of stands out from an efficiency standpoint that was a huge learning for you as an individual designer?
I think for me, it's always been part of my process, and I don't really know when I picked it up, but collaboration has been really key. And it's not really process orientated, but I just think it's worth bringing up because I do see a lot of design folk and even product folk working independently really early on. And then you end up going back to the drawing board when you bring someone else on or your other counterparts on and you haven't had chance to think about XYZ or you get this new perspective. And so something that I have tried to establish is a number of frameworks that designers can use to kick off collaborative projects or projects and do it in a collaborative way, I should probably say more so, just to avoid rework after rework. So yeah, probably that one.
I feel like communication and collaboration, it's a pretty essential part of a designer's role. And I think moving forward, it's one of the key skills that designers are going to have to really work on, because I think that's like design, it's such a communication led trade. So I think honing that skill, and especially when you're dealing with stakeholders every day, right? Like you need to be able to communicate what you're doing. You need to be able to go find your
Absolutely.
talk to, ask questions.
And you need to not be afraid to bring those stakeholders into your projects either. I think that's something that we're learning the hard way a little bit at Xero with the new kind of structures, which is that our stakeholders are much more involved. And I think there's this sort of fear that, oh, if they're involved, then I've done something wrong, versus no, they're involved because they know their stuff and they want to help and they want to engage and they want to pass on their advice and their wisdom. They also want to make sure that you're connecting with your right counterparts if you need to. So I think, yes, communication is really, really important, especially, like say, when we get to the point where we're communicating up and talking to our stakeholders and bring them in. But I think also collaborating with your stakeholders in a really productive way. Yeah, we need to be doing more of that.
I think there's almost an education piece there, and like being able to understand or profile your stakeholder and speak in their language.
Yeah.
Designers have their own language about how they communicate and what they're working on, whereas stakeholders, they are very different depending on where they sit in the business. You need to be able to understand how to communicate what you're doing with them to take them on that journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we do empathy maps for our users all the time. Empathy maps for your stakeholders too.
I don't think as many people it's not a topic that comes up. Everyone talks about the users and how they're focusing on the users, whereas stakeholders, they are where the money comes from.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm doing a project at the moment where I've just had to do a whole set of stakeholder interviews just to kind of understand where they're at and what involvement they want and things like that. Yeah, it's key.
Bronwen, I've really enjoyed today's chat. I really appreciate your time. It's been great and I've learned so much. So thank you so much. If anyone wants to got any other further questions or anything like that, is LinkedIn the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Pick me up on LinkedIn, definitely.
Beautiful. Well, once again, thank you for today.
Thank you, Joe. We appreciate it.